Howdy everybody, my name is John. I'm a photographer and cinematographer, among other things, located in Southern California, based out of the LA Metro. Recently I posted this photo to the postprocessing subreddit to ask how I did saving it from the dust, as you can see here. This was at a rally race that I shot a few weeks ago out in Jawbone Canyon, which is out past California City, if any of you happen to know where that is. And because there was so much interest in this photo specifically and my process behind it, I thought I would record a little bit of a breakdown to show you kind of exactly how I went through editing this. So I guess we can just jump right into it. I'm editing in Capture One. I prefer this to Lightroom and to Photoshop and to all the other editors that I've used, primarily because it is fully GPU and hardware accelerated, so everything is really snappy. There's no kind of hitches or lag like I was experiencing in Lightroom. So I've moved basically all of my cataloging and editing into Capture One, and I've been super happy with it for about the past 8 or 10 months that I've been using it. So what I've done down here is I have just made a virtual copy of this photo. So this is the photo as it was shot. Now, obviously, a lot of people, when they would see something like this, would think it's a junk photo. I'm not going to be able to use it. Let's get rid of it. But because this was a rally race, and for those of you who aren't familiar, each stage of the rally race, the cars only go by you once. So you really only have one shot to get each individual car. And if you look through this sequence of photos here, you're going to see that all of them came out like this. Like, it was every single one of these was just, ruined by dust. It was crazy. This dust actually killed a brand new radio that I had bought. As you can see, all of the photos in this sequence, you just wouldn't imagine that you'd be able to use these. But I realized with a little bit of playing around, I could get a result that looks like this. Now, this isn't perfect, but I would say that this is perfectly passable, especially if you're going to throw this up on social media where it's not going to be super heavily scrutinized. I think this is a perfectly acceptable final product to end up with, especially when you came from, effectively a ruined photo that you wouldn't use. So the first thing that we're going to have to tackle is the basic image layer here. Now, these are going to be the global adjustments that are going to affect everything in the image. This is kind of your base level edit. So one of the first things that I did is, even though I shot this in direct sunlight, or it was direct sunlight right at the beginning of the day, and so it may have had a little bit of extra orange in it, we're actually going to pull our white balance down. And so what this is going to do, because we have all of this dust here that, is this sort of, dust color, this beige, tan, orangey color, it's going to get rid of that orangish color cast. And so if we pull this down, I believe in the photo I had posted, it was right at about 4500. So let's keep it here. Now we can see right here in our histogram that all of our color channels, our RGB channels, are moved much closer together. We do have a little bit of extra red up in the, the sort of brighter shadow highlight areas, but the rest of the photo is sort of this tan color, so that's kind of expected. But what this is primarily going to allow us to do is it's going to make it much easier to dehaze this photo. So let's just keep going with this a little bit. I happen to know that this photo, it looks a little bit green on my reference monitor when I'm editing this, so I'm just going to give it just a touch of extra magenta here, so we'll get it to about 4500 and between 1.2 and 1.8. As far as the other adjustments for the image layer, again, these are going to be our base adjustments. I don't really mess with my exposure too much for most of the photos that I edit. I really try to get everything right in camera so that I don't have to go too much brighter or too much darker. And in terms of overall exposure, I feel like this is a decently well exposed photo that I'm not going to need to touch too much, so we're going to leave that be for right now. We are going to up our contrast a little bit. This is something that I do, of course, in all of my photos because I shoot everything in RAW, so we're going to up our contrast a little bit. Now, as you can see, that's going to give us a little bit more of a washing out in the image, because again, it's kind of a it's kind of a ruined by dust image, so it's going to give us a little bit more of a washout, but we're going to fix that later. We're also going to up our saturation just a little bit. Again, this is something that I do in all of the images that I edit because they're raw, and you really need to add some contrast and saturation in order to make them usable as a normal image. Now, in Capture One, it works a little bit differently from Lightroom or Photoshop or some of the other editors that you might be used to, because we actually have two different categories here for exposure, which gives us exposure, contrast, brightness, and saturation, and then we have high dynamic range, which is going to give us our highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. And it took a little bit of getting used to before I was fully comfortable with this system, but now it's as second nature as Lightroom was for me previously. And so this is going to be where we're going to be affecting our individual sections here up on the histogram. Interestingly enough, I'm actually going to bring up our highlights just a little bit, because I do like most of the highlights that we're going to end up with are going to be in the dust clouds behind the car here and up this road that the car just drove down, which is actually something that I kind of wanted to play up in this image. If you saw some of the other images from this location, that's kind of an element of the image that was one of the reasons that I took it. I'm actually going to up our highlights just a little bit. I'm also going to up our shadows. Shadows are kind of where most of the detail in an image lives. I almost always boost the shadows in the images that I edit, because that's where you get a lot of the additional detail on the texture. So shadows are going to go up a little bit, and then black is going to come down about to -15. Now, this isn't going to give us any major adjustments as far as getting rid of the haze or the dust in this image. It's a pretty good baseline, and it's pretty similar to how I would edit a normal image that didn't have this dust problem. And so nothing too major, as you can see here. The biggest change is probably going to be our white balance up here, but now we start going into the other more technical adjustments down here. Clarity is going to be the next one that we're going to be touching. Obviously, clarity, it's something that you're going to recognize from any of the other editing programs here. The only change is that we have a couple of different options here. I personally like Punch. I feel that it is the closest to what I'm going for, so I almost always use Punch in the Punch setting in the images that I edit. And we're not going to do too much here. The clarity tool in Capture One is very powerful, and so I don't normally go higher than about 15 or 20. For this image in particular, though, we're going to want to go pretty high for our image layer here, because obviously that's something we're going to need. Structure, it is almost the same thing as the texture tool in Lightroom, as far as I can tell, and so if you up the structure slider, it's just going to give you a little bit more detail, and it's going to give you a little bit more texture in the image. I usually gang these two together, or at least have them pretty close, so we're going to stick with about 20 and 18 for here. And now we come to dehaze. This is the tool that we're probably going to be the most concerned with for this image in particular. Obviously, we have a lot of dust in the air that we're going to try and cut through to get to an image that we're happy with. And one of the things that you need to know about dehaze is that it affects your image mostly in your shadow detail and your black detail. And so when you have a lot of smoke, dust, atmospheric haze that you're trying to cut through, the way it affects your image is typically in the black and shadow areas, because all of those particulates in the air are going to scatter light and obviously are going to basically bring up the exposure value of the darkest parts of the image. So as I bring up the dehaze slider, you're going to start to notice the histogram up here start to slide back down towards shadows and blacks. So I know from previous experience with this image that I had it at about 56, which that is very high. I almost never have to touch dehaze, and if I do, I stay below 10. 56 is very high, but this is an extreme case that we're trying to fix, so that's basically what we're going to have to do. And now the last tool we're going to talk about for this image layer is going to be our vignetting tool. So I know there is a little bit of vignetting with this image. You can see the corners here are a little bit darker than the rest of the image here, and so we're just going to bring up our vignetting to about 0.5. That kind of just helps even out the corners and the rest of the image. It is still a little bit darker here, but natural vignetting is something that happens with every lens pretty much, and it is not entirely a bad thing. So we're actually done for our basic adjustments for this image, and as you can tell, if I go to before and after, this is already a lot better than it was. We can do more though, so we're going to start moving into masks and how we can further affect specific parts of the image with masked adjustments. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to add a new adjustment layer here, and we're going to use one of the features that I love about Capture One, which is our AI Select tool. This is basically a system that will allow us to click and drag, draw a box, or click on individual objects, and it will create essentially a perfect mask for that object without us having to go through and do really painstaking work that takes forever. So we're just going to select the car here, right here. And as you can see, it'll give you a preview of what you're selecting, and I'm pretty happy with that. So we're just going to let go of the box and declick that, and then we're just going to hit M on the keyboard, check if we're happy with this mask. This seems pretty much perfect to me. I don't really think I would change too much about this. So I'm totally happy with that. We're going to turn off our mask, and we're going to start to get to work on adjusting the car specifically. So because we've done most of our adjustments in our image layer already, there's not too much I'm going to need to do in our exposure tab. I am going to bump up our contrast just a touch, and then our saturation just a touch as well. Most of the major changes are going to be coming up right now. These are going to be very different from the changes that I would make to a subject mask in another photo if I was shooting cars on a clean racetrack or on another surface, or if I was shooting a concert or something like that. These are very different from the changes that I would make for that, but it's just what the situation necessitates. So first thing is our highlights. The side of the car right here is a little hot for me in the location that I was shooting. You can tell from the shadows right here. The sun was kind of, it was back right here, and it's just taking this really bad bounce off the rear quarter panel of this car. It's kind of washing out some of these colors. So I'm actually going to bring our highlights down pretty far. So they're going to be at about -70, and you can see how much color that's already brought in back to the side of this car. I'm pretty happy with that there. Now, as I had mentioned previously when I was discussing the Haze tool, most of the information you're losing when you have haze or other particulates in the air is going to be in your shadows and your blacks. Those are going to be much higher values than they otherwise would be if you didn't have dust or other particulate in the air. So we're really going to want to bring those down to get back some of the detail, especially in the grill of the car right here, on the inside of the tire. There's a lot more we can do to kind of give the illusion that we're not actually having to cut through dust. So we're going to bring down our shadows just a little bit. About -20 seems about right to me. And then we're going to bring our blacks down pretty far. So not all the way, but -70, -75 seems about right to me. You can see how much extra detail we have in the grille and on the insides of the tires and all of those things, and how much richer and clearer the car is. If I just click right here to turn the black slider on and off, you can see how much more natural the car looks. There is a definite sort of orangish beige haze on the front of the car right here, and as soon as we bring down the black channel, some of that starts to go away, which that's exactly the effect we're going for. We are going to add a little bit of extra clarity to the car. That's the subject of the image. That's what we care the most about. So we're going to add a little bit extra. Not a lot, because it will compound on top of the clarity we've already added. And going too far with clarity makes your images look overdone very quickly. So we're just going to bring this up just a little bit, about 15 and 10 or 15 here. And we're going to add a little bit more dehaze. Again, not much, just a little bit extra to really kind of bring out the remaining detail that we can get out of the front of the car here. And so for this car, that's pretty close to what I would like it to be. The only thing that kind of rubs me the wrong way is that even though I was using a polarizer, because of the position of the sun, we do have some of this blue sort of sky reflection on the windshield, so we're going to get rid of that too. We're going to add another layer here. We're going to go back to our AI select tool here, and we're going to find an area right there that only selects our windshield. And so let's just toggle mask on and off. That works for me. And then we're going to go to our color editor right here, and we're going to pick blue, and we're just going to drag saturation for blue down quite a bit. And so you can see there's not much of that blue left in the windshield here. That's kind of a color that's really, really common when you are shooting cars. If you aren't able to get your polarizer to play nice with the lighting conditions, you will see a blue sort of tinge to the windshield, and that's just that's something that always rubs me the wrong way. So what you can do in Capture One that's really cool is what I just did. You can select the windshield and pull down blue, and it gets rid of that without touching really anything else at all. And so lastly, what we're going to do a little bit of extra adjustment up to this upper left corner here. Because we've done so much dehaze and contrast work and all of those things, it's kind of made this upper corner look a bit unnatural. As you can see, it's all the shrubbery and everything up here is very dark. It's much darker than you would imagine it would be looking at this as from a naturalistic point of view. And so we're just going to bring up the shadows and the black levels there just to make it kind of fall in line more with the rest of the image. So we're going to add a third adjustment layer here. We're going to grab a brush, just a normal brush this time. We're going to give it a little bit extra size, and we're just going to create a little bit of a mask right here. So let's hit M. We can add a little bit more here just to make sure we go to the corners of the image. And that looks about right for me. So the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to turn that off, deselect our mask tool, and we're going to go up to contrast here. We're going to bring down our contrast so that it brings the values up here closer together. And then we are also going to go to in the high dynamic range section, we are going to go to shadows, and we're going to bring up our shadows just a little bit, just a hair, and then our black levels just a little bit as well, about 40. And so that just helps blend that section with the rest of the background here. And if we turn on and off this layer here, you can see how much of a difference that makes in kind of selling the idea that we haven't done too much to this image. And then the very final thing that we're going to do is we're just going to get rid of these cones down here. They're a little bit distracting, but from the angle I was shooting at, you couldn't really frame them out of the photo, but that's very easy to do. We're just going to add a fourth adjustment layer. We're going to get our healing mask tool, and we're just going to draw over these real quickly. Let's grab this and move it somewhere where it blends a little bit better. When you're doing this, by the way, it's generally good practice to take your sample point that you're using to patch your image from about the same depth as the object you're trying to patch out. If I were to say take my sample point from, back here or something like that, you can see the dirt on the ground is much sharper than the rest of the dirt on the ground at the depth level of that cone, because this sample point is about at my plane of focus, and the plane of focus is on the car here. But if I bring my sample point to much closer to the front of the image, which is about the same depth as that cone, the bokeh is about the same as it would be on that cone, and it doesn't strike anybody as unnatural. I'm going to do the same thing for this other cone here and bring that up just a little bit. Let's find somewhere where it doesn't stick out. Move it over a little bit so we get rid of this rock here, and it's like it was never there. Now, if we hit Y on our keyboards, this is where we started off, and this is where we ended up. Now, it's not perfect. Ideally, you would try to avoid shooting through dust or haze or smoke or fog in the first place, so you wouldn't have to go through all this work to try and save a photo. But given the circumstances, I think this is extremely passable. I had quite a few people reach out to me and purchase photos almost exactly like this from other points in the race or from other cars, and they were perfectly happy with it, and I guess that's really all that matters. Anyways, that was just a quick breakdown of kind of my processes behind editing this photo. I know a lot of you guys had some questions about how exactly I did it and, what my methodology was, so I thought I would put together this quick video for all of you guys that were curious. Now, get out of here and go take some pictures.